So let's go back to a contagion of bad ideas and disprove some more.
Or, as it turned out, which wasn't the primary endpoint of the trials, the same was at least against any severe illness like death or hospitalization. So the
No, he's wrong about that. They did not measure death and hospitalization. He's just made that up.
transmission, and then we went through this alpha, beta, gamma, and then finally now to delta. Now delta, there is a small drop off in effectiveness. We don't have an efficacy trial. We have now effectiveness in the real world. And what we're seeing now is like a 5 or 6 point drop. So instead of 95%, it's like 88, 90% effectiveness. That's exceptionally good against any symptomatic infection, and 96% against death or hospitalization, which...
Again, that's not true. I don't know where he got these numbers, but I'm going to ask everyone to recall the effectiveness dropped very fast, very early. I mean, it was 95%, and this was not even the real effectiveness numbers, as I just explained. They were the relative risk reduction, which means almost nothing. So there's so much deception going on here. It's incredible. But whatever number they were claiming and whatever meaning they put behind it was dropping like crazy. Remember, it was about every month it dropped a tremendous amount. It was 95, then it was 82, and then it was 71, and then it was 66, then it was 51, then it was 45, then it was 37, then it was 22, all in the first year. And that's why they kept having us take boosters. You don't take extra boosters if the effectiveness isn't dropping. They had us taking boosters because the effectiveness was falling apart on them. And it was not for serious disease and death either. That was never the case. As a matter of fact, there was a large arm of the trial that had 21 deaths in the vaccinated group and only 17 in the control group. So you look at something like that and you go, wait a minute, aren't vaccines supposed to help you? How come there were more people dying in the vaccinated group than there were in the control group? That large arm of the trial had 21 people dying in the vaccinated group and reports of anything from 13 to 17 in the control group, meaning more people died in the vaccinated group. And when Dr. Bhattacharya and I discussed that, he told me that the 17 versus 21 was not significant. And, I accepted that. Dr. Bhattacharya is very skillful at analyzing trials. He does a lot of them, and I let him just have that one because he swore to me that those numbers were not effective, and I believe they weren't. He wasn't trying to pull one over on everybody. But the point is, the government and the big pharma were having to give us boosters every few months. So you really have to wonder where Dr. Topol is coming from with numbers like that coming out in the trials. And again, the trials were for the PCR-based amplification technique, not the ones that were used in the public, which was E. coli and plasmids. That's what the effectiveness data should have come from. Those were never tested in trials, believe it or not. It's just an incredible deception that occurred. The ones where the effectiveness numbers were gathered were not ever tested before they were given to the public. It's just incredible the deception that occurred. So let's continue on here.
Is extraordinary. So here we have, what most would consider the best vaccine and data sets in history. And it's ironic that we have such a substantial number of people, or as you position it, bubble, that just are still not believing this. And
This is so deceptive. He's saying it's the best in history, and we all know, if you're honest, you'll all remember the effectiveness of these things dropping off a cliff. It was down at 27% or something by the end of the year, and they were having us take more boosters. Remember all this? Like every 3 months, there was another booster to take. It was ridiculous. And Eric, Dr. Topol is talking about these being the best in history. I'll tell you. He says he's not a shill for the big pharma, and I'm sure he doesn't get paid for this or think he is. And of course, he's honest with himself, but he is doing their bidding for them to get people to take a vaccine that just is extremely toxic and didn't work at all, basically.
of course, the safety has gone along with that.
Yeah, so there are many kind of natural experiments happening.
No, the safety did not go along with it. I just explained, and I'm going to prove it later, and you'll be shocked at how unsafe these things are. What they do to your immune system and cause ribosomal frame shifting, making nonsense proteins we don't know anything about, how toxic they are. Plus, you've got the major histocompatibility complex destroying cells in all organs of the body, and the endothelium of our blood vessels was destroyed, and that caused clots to form. I mean, I tell you, I wish Dr. Topol had agreed to discuss this with me in person, and we could have really gotten into how dangerous these things are, but I guess he didn't want to answer my query, and so I'm stuck with having to critique Sam and his voice on this very long podcast, and I'm going to do my best to help people understand this, and we'll go from there as far as making people decide for themselves after you've heard both opinions. And that's what censorship is all about. You've got to allow people to voice their own opinions and rely on the public to make their decisions on what's best for them. Neil Young and Joni Mitchell thought that Spotify should deplatform Joe Rogan because he had people on the his podcasts that had a different opinion on a lot of this stuff than the manufactured government narrative. And I side with Joe Rogan on this. I mean, Neil Young, I'll tell you one thing, I never thought I'd see the day when Neil Young would side with big corporations over the common man. But he did. And so did Joni Mitchell. I'm just shocked. But anyway, they wanted to deplatform Rogan for having a different opinion on his show. Wow. In other words, they believe in censorship of certain people, which I find very shocking. But let's continue.
Happening here. So I mean, one thing you can do is compare the rates of hospitalization and death for the vaxxed and unvaxxed. I mean, granted, there are contexts in which this can be misleading. So I mean, obviously, in a society where 100% of people are fully vaccinated, well then 100% of people who are hospitalized or dead from COVID will also be fully vaccinated, right? So, I mean, but presumably there'll be very few of them if the vaccines actually work. But we have many situations where around 50% of people are fully vaccinated and 50% aren't. And we can compare what's happening at the hospitals and in the morgues. And I mean, you take a place like Virginia, where about just under 54% of the population is fully vaccinated. If you look at the hospitalization data, over 98% of the people hospitalized are not fully vaccinated, and over 99% of the deaths are for people who are not fully vaccinated. So
I've got to jump in here because this is so misleading. Also, just about everything they say is just wrong. I don't know if everyone knows this, but certainly lots of the public knows this. Getting a vaccine and waiting 2 weeks is the amount of time that was necessary for that individual to be considered vaccinated. 2 weeks. So in other words, they were considered unvaccinated in the first 2 weeks, even though they had gotten the vaccination. And if you look at the data, you'll find that many of the adverse effects that occurred from the vaccine occurred on the day of vaccination or the next day, and certainly within 2 weeks. But those were considered unvaccinated deaths and injuries. I don't know how they got away with doing that. But when Sam says unvaccinated, he's talking about an awful lot of people who got injured in the first 2 weeks, which is totally misleading. And also, Sam's talking about if everyone is vaccinated, then everyone that goes to the hospital is going to be vaccinated. Of course, Sam, we know that. That's like a trivial question for a ninth grader. Everybody understands that. Good Lord. So, it's just a triviality just to mention something like that. So you use as an example Virginia, where it's about half and half. But again, you're not taking into consideration that the first 2 weeks after vaccination, they still stay in the unvaccinated group. All this stuff has to be taken into consideration if you really want to analyze this.
It's just that our hospitals are not filling with the vaccinated in places where there's comparable cohorts of vaccinated and unvaccinated people. So what we appear to have now is a raging pandemic among the unvaccinated. And of course, some number of vaccinated people will experience breakthrough illness and even severe illness and death, but the numbers are minuscule by comparison. Is there any way in which this doesn't speak to the effectiveness of the vaccines? I mean, is this a...
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you're bringing up what has been used, again, by the same people who are the anti-vaxxers, anti-science. But what is being used is the increasing number of breakthrough infections with Delta.
I will say this. First of all, the variant doesn't matter. All these principles we're talking about apply to any variant. But I had a point I was going to make there. Let me think if I can find it. If I can think of it real fast. Otherwise, I'll continue. I better just continue, and it'll come to me later.
So in prior, Delta, we know, has a viral load, or the number of copies of replicant virus that is capable of replication, 1,000-fold or more, compared with the ancestral strain. So we know it's a more challenging virus, much more contagious, transmissible. Now, with that, with the breakthrough infections of people winding up in the hospital with prior variants, versions of the virus, was less than 1%, and even less than a fraction of 1%, and something like 0.1% for death. Now, it has gone up some for Delta. That is, now it's a couple of percent, a few percent hospitalizations. And, perhaps it will approach 1% in death. But the point...
No, that's wrong. The natural history of these viruses is that they become less virulent and more contagious over time, more transmissible over time. And he's got the infection fatality rate, which is 0.1% for this. And of course, that's the infection fatality rate of the flu too, which I was the first to calculate when the governments all around the world were saying it was 4%. I calculated it based on the Diamond Princess cruise ship data to be 0.1%. And the CDC finally agreed that I was right. I'll tell you, there was so much deception with this. They were trying to scare people into the vaccine from day one. And I said, no, the infection fatality rate is 0.1%. And I can prove it to you based on Diamond Princess data. And now I did it on March 8th of 2020, and Dr. Ioannidis, who obviously did it in parallel, at the same time as me, so he deserves the same credit, published it on March 17th. Dr. John Ioannidis over at Stanford. So we understood this from the beginning, and the people that were trying to push 4% on everybody were trying to push an infection fatality rate that was 40 times too high. Can you imagine that? Deceiving the public like that? So that was one of the early things I did. But the earliest thing, major thing I did, I proved that the virus could not have come from natural zoonotic spillover on February 20th of 2020. Oh my gosh. And I was the first to do that also, to prove that it could not have come from natural zoonotic spillover. As a matter of fact, some people still believe that it came from an intermediate animal at the Hunan seafood wet market, which is what Tedros of the WHO, the World Health Organization, was trying to tell everybody, and it was completely wrong. I mean, as soon as we disproved the wet market theory, this entire charade should have ended. It should have. But the people, for some reason, allowed it to continue, that it was caused by some novel coronavirus, which it never was caused by that. Gosh, I just am shocked at how people allowed themselves to be abused like that worldwide now. And look what it did to everybody. It absolutely ruined many, many people's lives. It's just a tragedy what happened. So many people died that first year, not from some novel coronavirus, which never existed, but from horrible things that were done to them. A lot of people committed suicide and died of drug overdoses. Those were the two causes of death that actually increased in 2020. Every other kind of cause of death actually decreased. It's just so upsetting to know what our government and Big Pharma did. Just remember back to 1976. If you don't believe that could ever happen, it happened again in 2020. Let's continue.
Point here is that this is a formidable now version of the virus, and what we have is a problem with mathematics, because people who don't understand that, like for example, let's say in Israel, where you have more than half of the current breakthrough infections, people are in the hospital, and say, oh, well, look, the vaccines aren't working. Well, that's just because in Israel, among these people that are being looked at, 89% of adults
Are vaccinated.
have been vaccinated.
Yeah.
So,
there's no one else. There's no one left to get sick. Yeah.
Again, we all know this. This is so simple. Again, it's a 9th grade arithmetic problem. We know that you have to compare and this is probably what I was thinking of back then, you have to compare the number of percent of people in the hospital being vaccinated or unvaccinated with the percent of people in the general population that are vaccinated or unvaccinated. This is how I solved the problem with calculus in less than a month. And all the CDC jocks, I guess, just wanted to use algebra or something. But if you do it properly, if you do the mathematics properly, then you're going to be able to figure out that the vaccines are not blocking transmission or preventing you from getting the disease. And now it's common knowledge that they didn't work. But back then, when I proved it, again, Dr. Bhattacharya and the CDC jocks were trying to tell me that it was impossible to figure it out that quickly based on available data, but it was not the case. Now, I don't know if I told you this, but Dr. Bhattacharya and I became good friends, and we ended up doing almost 24 hours together because we enjoyed it a lot. We knew we were helping the public. Oh, yeah, I did tell you this because I pointed out that YouTube was removing our videos. And again, Susan Wojcicki, who's passed on now, was the number one ranked censor in my book, Heroes and Villains, the COVID-19 Book of Lists, where I rank people based on the number of people who died because of their policies. She was ranked number one in censorship. Deborah Birx was ranked number one in women who caused the most death and destruction because of her pushing of the lockdowns, primarily. And there were about 200 lists in there with people ranked, again, based on the number of people who died because of their policies and the policies they pushed and supported. So that's a very good book to look at also. Let me show you what that one looks like. This is the hardcover edition. Heroes and Villains, the COVID-19 Book of Lists. But it's also on Amazon. But it's only, let's see how many pages this one is. 200 pages. And again, it's list after list after list. And I supply, which is a nice touch, I supply the pictures of everyone. I hope you can see this. The pictures of everyone at the top of the list so you can associate a face with a name. This one, for example, has this is the layman who entered the fray, very much to their utter humiliation. And rank number one is Andrew Cuomo, the New York governor, etc. down the list. And so forth. I don't want to read all these lists to you. You can get the book. It's very interesting to read it, though. And in my book, Sanction the COVID Murders, I'm going to redo all the lists and add probably 100 more lists to it. It's going to be enormous. But you're going to get to find out who was behind all of this and what they did. And for any lawyers out there, if you're interested in knowing who did what before you bring a suit, you should get a copy of that book.